Good evening, class. Once again, my name is George Webb, and I'm excited today to tell you all about a significant event in our history and some of the major role players that put such an event into action. I think today, this year specifically, is a perfect time for us to be reminded about where we have come from as a society and where we have to go. For that reason, I have elected today to speak on the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Throughout the 1960s, many civil and social rights movements and events captured the ears and hearts of the American population. It was a time for growth in our country, a time for people to be heard, and thus a time of great turbulence. Some of our young nation's most significant positive and negative events occurred just around this time. It was the same year, as we all know, as the assassination of John F. Kennedy. However, the most significant events were the nonviolent protests gathering hundreds of thousands to take a stand against civil injustice in America. In 1941, A. Philip Randolph conceived the idea of a mass march on Washington, D.C. for jobs and freedoms he believed were not available to the black man and woman of modern day. 20 years later, he and another leader of the NAACP, Roy Wilkins, brought the idea to fruition. It was promised that a public march would occur, ending at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial on the Mall, where the participants could gather to hear activists of their cause speak in support of this march and more. It took place that year on August the 28th, and over 200,000 people were reported to have walked in support of this movement. Thousands of reporters and journalists observed the march, amplifying the message past the bounds of our capital into the homes and mailboxes of citizens nationwide. After the demonstration, there were 6 significant speakers set to address the masses. Amongst these were activists from many backgrounds, including the clergy and universities, including one specifically significant man. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., chairman of the SCLC, was set to speak for 4 minutes, just like us, yet continued on for over 16 to deliver one of the most, if not the most, important speeches of all time. His speech, known today as the I Have a Dream speech, addressed the entirety of the United States population, calling on them to look forward to a more progressive future, one that only their work and efforts could bring to reality. While he addressed many issues facing the minorities of the United States, his main plea was for the blanketed equal treatment of all men and women. In this specific speech, he is quoted saying, "I still have a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. One day this nation will rise up and live up to its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." He reminds our nation that the principles it was founded upon are rooted in morality, that what we have here is the gross misapplication of the pleas and desires of our forefathers. The United States was a nation of godliness that promoted freedoms, fresh starts, and open-mindedness, yet failed to be the beacon of hope we'd previously believed it to be. Dr. King used his time in hopes to remind us all that a better future is possible, and that a more tolerant one is ahead. As a result of such a speech and a movement like this, quickly the people of America were rewarded with some changes in legislation. President Lyndon B. Johnson, successor of President Kennedy, was moved along with the Senate to sign into legislation acts like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and a year later, the National Voting Rights Act of 1965. Acts such as these are building blocks for the progress of our country and the progress we've made since, and will always be significant in our history. Speaking of historical significance, the March on Washington will remain one of the most impactful events ever. Rarely has a cause ever led to the rallying of 200,000 people in the same place. However, regardless of this impact, today we are seeing a need for similar protesting once again. Just this year, we have seen protests, some nonviolent, some not as peaceful, in almost every major city across the country. In wake of recent exposures of police brutality and the continued organized mistreatment of minorities rooted in our history, people have stood up once again. It is sad to think that now, as almost 60 years pass since the deliverance of Dr. King's speech, his dream has not yet come to reality. Yes, it is important to consider the ground we have made and the progressiveness of the next generation. However, all things considered, we are still seeing people brutalized, murdered, or institutionalized every day unjustly due to the color of their skin. As the youth of our nation, we must look into events of our past like the March on Washington and learn from their successes. There's no better time for progress than now, and I see promise in the uprising shown against cruelty. Thank you again for your time. I look forward to hearing from you all, and I hope you all gained some additional perspective today. Thanks.